Hey, it's TDA and welcome to episode 17 of this perfect ratio run. Today we're taking a little bit of a detour because I want to welcome you to Kerbal 2, a nice lush planet, prairie planet to be exact, with green pastures, a lot of nice flowers, a lot of nice trees, oceans, etc. And most importantly, it has a lot of resources which we can strip mine and then of course use to improve our factory and completely ruin the ecosphere of this planet. Specifically, this planet has a lot of oil. If we check out the planet, it has a base resource of 70 oil per second. That is before we take into account anything like the additional vein production, mining production, things that we've already researched. So this is actually going to be a lot more than that. And of course that is really nice because we need a lot of oil and our main planet was slowly running dry. Of course, it was nowhere near completely dry, but you do want to keep up your resource speed. Now, like I said, this is going to be a little bit of a detour because we were building the orbital collectors with the main purpose of getting enough hydrogen going. But what I actually want to show you is a few more things that at this phase of the game are really useful, and it's really easy to kind of focus on a few things. But I think it's worth mentioning this. Now, first of all, I'm going to show you a very simple blueprint that is actually a third version of our oil production facility. I'm not going to bother build it because you've seen this before. It's just a slightly larger version of the oil refinement system that we had in place, but now without all the storage, it simply feeds into this ILS, and this ILS will be supplying the system with oil and hydrogen. So this is one way to get some base hydrogen, because of course it's a side product from getting oil. And the reason I upgraded it a little bit is because on the systems that further out from your main system, you will get larger oil seeps, are these things called? Oil seeps, that was the word I was looking for. As you can see, it usually in the closer systems, so not really like the outliers on the far ends of your galaxy, but relatively close to where you start out. On your base planet, they are usually somewhere of 2 to 3 per second. And as you can see, it basically goes up to around 5 now. And again, there is a few multipliers in there because of the additional production you get from research. So it can go, the effective speed goes up to around 6 per seep. And of course, there's smaller and bigger ones. Generally speaking, that's around a common area that you will find them in. And as you can see, we have 12 of these, which will be enough to handle 6 per second. So 6 raw oil per second is the maximum production that will go through one simple build like this. You can scale it up for the further systems, but this is a pretty good, small, little, easy to place down base thing you can do. Now, that will get you a few things. It will get you a lot of oil, it will get you a lot of hydrogen, but of course we want even more hydrogen, because if you have to rely on this production of hydrogen along, of course, with your gas giants, you're still going to run out of hydrogen at some point. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a very simple build that I will show you in a few seconds. Let me find a good place and let's get to it. Okay, so here we are. Now, you might remember this little piece of research that we skipped initially on. It is, where is it? Here, X-ray cracking. Now, this is a trap that a lot of players fall into initially. It seems like a very easy way to get the base research or the base materials for your red science. Of course, you need hydrogen and graphite for that, and this recipe produces exactly that, and it's around the time where you unlock it. You actually do need red research in order to unlock this, but you can do it the first thing basically after you unlock it and then start cracking away. But I don't recommend doing that at that point in the game because you don't have that many access to oil at that point, and this is actually quite a cumbersome recipe because, as you can see, it needs oil. You first need to refine this oil, which you haven't probably done a lot at that point. You need hydrogen to put it in, and then it produces a little bit more hydrogen than you initially got, along with some graphite. Graphite on your base planet is really simple to make just from coal, so that by itself is not enough reason to use this recipe. And the hydrogen you get from this recipe is not that much either. I mean, you put in 2, you get out 3, and it actually costs you an oil. So all in all, this is a very, especially energy intensive way to make hydrogen. And again, at this point in the game, you probably don't need that much hydrogen because literally the only use you have for it is red science. However, at the point in the game where we are now, we are making a lot of things that require Casimir crystals. They need a lot of hydrogen, which is also why we're working on the orbital collectors. But then this certainly turns into quite an effective way to make hydrogen. Still, it's not quite efficient, but in terms of power requirements at this point in the game, it's going to be less and less of an issue. And yeah, you might as well make use of this recipe at this point because it's already very easy now to scale it up. Now, the build is not complex, but I'll actually show you how to make it in such a way that it's more efficient to build, which is something you can apply to different builds as well. Now, first of all, we are going to need an input for 2 things. We are going to need an input for oil, and we're going to need an input for hydrogen. And I'm going to make this build on 2 sides, so I can kind of show you a symmetric build first of all, but we can also more easily scale it up. And then we're going to need 2 of these on one side, and we're going to need, of course, 2 of these on the other side. We are going to have 1 belt going out up here, and we're going to have a second belt, and I do need to make sure I do this correctly now, out like this, and we're going to have another belt like this. Now, we are going to have oil on this middle belt over here. Don't need that much oil actually. We are going to have hydrogen on this belt, and we are going to have even more hydrogen on this belt. There we go. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to put in the hydrogen, we're going to put in the oil, we're going to put in the hydrogen, we're going to put in the oil, etc, etc. This should not be surprising at all. That fixes that. And we're going to have an outgoing belt over there. And of course, we're going to have to mirror that on this side. So what we're going to do is have that belt and the second belt. And we are actually going to take out all of this. And do that like that. Now, of course, now these 2 on this side don't actually have an outgoing. Let me turn off the warnings for a moment. We don't have an outgoing belt for the stuff to go anywhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to temporarily put in a belt like this. Now we are going to put in the sorter like this. The sorter does not need to be at the same level as this one. So if we put this one on the upper or lowest one on this side, we can put it in the middle over here. And that is important. We are going to remove the belt. Yes, we are going to remove the belt. And we are going to add in a few more sorters over here. Like this. And this is going to be a sorter which is only going to draw in the graphite. That has just going to be on the same belt as the hydrogen. Because remember, this will output both the hydrogen and the graphite. And of course, we are going to do the same thing over here. Now, if we do it like that, by doing it like this, that means that we will have the outgoing graphite here, and we're going to have the outgoing hydrogen over here. Similarly, on the other side, this will be a belt with graphite, and this is going to be a belt of hydrogen. Okay, so let's look at the recipe for a moment. In order to get a full belt of hydrogen, that means that we can have 30 per second going through. To get there, one of these facilities will be producing 3 per 4 seconds. So if we have 4 of these facilities, it will be producing exactly 3 per second. And then 10 times that will be producing 30 per second. So that means 10 times 4 is 40 of these facilities on each side will be making sure that we get a full belt. A full belt out means 30 per second, but it also means that we need 20 per second going in. So the inner belts of hydrogen, and that is why there are 2 of them, each need 20 per second. So we need 2 belts because we need in total 40 per second. And then we actually have 30 per second going out, but that also means that we only have 10 per second going in terms of oil. So times 2 is 20 oil per second going in. So we only need one belt for that. Now, having to make this build in terms of 40 on each side means 80 refineries in total is quite a lot if you do it by hand. So let me show you a more intelligent way of doing that. And that is exactly what we have prepared over here. So if we use the blueprint, we are just going to select this, use now. And because of the way we constructed this, we can simply add in like this. So this is 4 on each side, 6 on each side, 8 on each side, 10 of each side on each side, and then we're just going to kind of go out again. This is 10. I'm actually not sure if I have enough room here, but I think we do. 20, 30. Hello, autosave, and 40. There we go. Now, this will be actually enough to have an entire 2 belts outgoing of hydrogen and 2 belts going in. So in total, this will cost you 20 oil per second. It will get you 20 hydrogen per second, which is quite a lot. You will need it, but it's quite a lot. And in addition to that, of course, we also have a little overproduction of graphite going in. And as you can see, because we have 40 on each side, that means we have 10 on each side in terms of output of graphite. So we actually have 20 graphite per second going out as well. We don't actually have a use for that, because remember, in this particular playthrough, we are actually only using base materials, which graphite is not. Don't despair. We have a solution for that, at least a temporary solution, which is just putting down boxes and feed it into that. That's not really an ideal solution, because boxes will fill up and then everything comes to a standstill, of course, because everything backs up. But we have another solution for that. So let me find another space and let me show you. And that brings us to this really nice build. It's very simplistic, but very effective. And what we are going to do in this build is pretty much just burn off the graphite. We are requesting it over here. It's not currently working because I haven't powered it up. It's going to put the graphite on a belt, and then it's going to go into these thermal power plants. Now, you can actually interconnect thermal power plants directly to each other, and they will supply each other with the burning material, so that's really nice. You don't need to put in a lot of belts. And let's do some math, because we are producing, if we put down one of the facilities that I just showed you, the fracking facilities, we are going to be producing 20 graphite per second, which we completely want to get rid of, because of course we don't want that to back up. If we're producing 20 graphite per second and the energy it's supplying is 6.75 megajoules, as you can see in the description. If you look up the description of the power plant, you will see that it's able to supply 2.16 megawatts per second, or continuously, whatever you want to call that. And it does so at an 80% efficiency ratio. That actually means that in order to get that 2.16 megawatts output, you need to supply it with 2.7 megawatts of energy. Why? Because 2.7 times 80% is exactly 2.16 megawatts. So if we go back to the graphite, it has 6.75 megajoules of energy, and that turns into 6.75 megawatts of energy. Now, that means that in order to get that 2.7 output, or 2.16 effective output in the thermal power plant, 6.75 is of course more than 2.7, so that means it will take this power plant exactly, if you divide those two numbers on each other, it will take the power plant exactly 2.5 seconds to burn 1 graphite at max power. Or in other words, 0.4 graphite per second is going to be absorbed if the power plant is working at full power. Now, we had 20 per second. And that means that we are going to need 20 divided by 0.4 is 50 thermal power plants in order to process 20 graphite per second. Assuming, and this is important, assuming that the power plant is working at full power. It won't be working at full power if you don't actually need the power. So that's something to take into account. But anyway, let's assume for a moment it's working at full power. You need 50. These are exactly 50 power plants. And the really cool thing about this is if you use this blueprint, where is it? It's over here. It's actually quite small. So you can actually fit it, for example, right over here in one of the upper quadrants of the planet. It will fit. It's going to be tight, but it will fit. So you can easily use that, for example, on a new mining planet to just kickstart that production and place a few of these things on a few mining planets, and you have some base power wherever you want, which is especially useful on planets that don't have an atmosphere. Now, if you look at this planet, for example, it has the solar energy working at 84%, so it's not completely efficient. But let's see if we can find a planet in this system that is actually worse. For example, this planet has only 68% solar energy ratio, so it's not going to be that efficient to actually build solar panels on such a planet. Generally speaking, if you get closer to the sun, of course, it works better. But the further out you get, the less efficient that gets. So you might want to consider using, for example, one of these builds, or maybe two of these builds, depending, of course, on how many graphite you have to burn. Now, that's one way of doing that. So simply using the energy as a part of your builds. However, typically speaking, you want to make sure you're at 100% power, and you need these to work at 100% power to ensure you're burning off more than you're using. Assuming you use it at a 1-to-1 ratio compared to the fracking facilities you have, you can of course just put down more of these on different planets, and at some point you will of course consume all the graphite you have. But then in turn, that's not reliable because you're not sure on how much graphite you're actually getting, etc. There's a more efficient way to do that. Alright, so I hooked everything up and I realized I should probably give you a few tips and tricks on this. This is the refinery facility. I took out the two ILSs over here and simply combined them all into one. Why not? Keep it simple. It allows for a bit more smooth placing and closer together. I also took out an outgoing belt of oil straight into the fracking facility because there's no reason to have drones flying all over the place when the belt can do it faster and more power efficient. And then of course you do need to actually kickstart this thing because you need some initial hydrogen in this facility. Now what you can do of course is simply take out a little bit of hydrogen from this and put it in here. You actually only need 2 hydrogen to kickstart this thing. The first facility will start working, produce 3 hydrogen, etc. So you will have a upgoing circle production of hydrogen, and that will slowly kickstart the entire facility. Actually very fun to watch if you want to try it out if you first build one of these things. So just put in a few molecules of hydrogen and see it slowly kickstart the entire thing. But anyway, mine is completely working already. We are now producing the graphite. Again, I just put in a belt and I am feeding it straight into my thermal facilities over here. As you can see, they're almost all working already. Slowly keeping up with production. Now, we are actually completely satisfied in terms of power at the moment. As you can see, we have a capacity that's way exceeding our demand. So these facilities are not completely working at full speed, which is a problem because that means we're not burning all the graphite that we're actually producing. So keep that in mind. So what we actually need to do is, and that is why I prepared 2 more builds, is we are going to use that for something. Now, we have my little build over here. This is a small charging facility for the accumulators. So what you do is you take some empty accumulators, you put them in, or you request them from wherever you're building them. I haven't actually done that yet, and they will be charged. Now, one point to notice is that you actually do need splitters on these things because you need to actually insert them with a belt for some reason instead of using sorters. That would have been way easier, developers. Consider changing that. Anyway, you need to feed them into the belt from one direction, but if the demand is actually, or the supply is actually greater, they will back up. So in order to supply multiple at the same time, you need these splitters. The outputs actually, so the empty ones, or sorry, the full ones in this case, are actually going straight through the facility. So you can simply do it like that. And as you can see, for some reason, we're actually having them split over here, so they're kind of circling around, but they will end up being in here, and that should work just fine. Now, remember, this is only the charging facility. You also need to discharge these things, of course, somewhere in wherever the places that you're using them. Now, I have built a little bit more complex build for that, and that is this one over here. It looks really cool, by the way, don't you think? I built it in advance because of the size of these things. It's really annoying sometimes to fit in the belts in between, so I didn't want to waste your time looking at me struggling with belts, so I prepared in advance. The inputs, the same basic thing. We need the splitters to make sure everything is being supplied with full accumulators, was the word I was looking for. And these are discharging now. Now, the discharges are a little bit of a funny thing. They will also always be discharging at full capacity as long as you have any demand on your planet that is enough to satisfy that. Which means that in a lot of cases, if you're using this on a planet where you're supplying energy that you also, for example, have solar panels on, like I do, then it could actually end up in a situation where it prioritizes the discharging of accumulators over using the solar panels. I'm not sure why that is, but it's the way it works at the moment, which is really annoying because that means you're basically wasting your energy, or at least part of your energy. Now, what you can fix that by putting in charging facilities straight after your discharging facilities. Now, how does this work? Let's say that you're discharging more than you're actually using. The chargers are actually only charging based on the excess supply of energy that you have. So, in considering this as a closed loop, it's a very easy example. As you can see, this is a closed loop. We're barely using any energy in this loop, but still we are actually discharging at full capacity. So we have 6 of these things continuously supplying us with power. We have barely any demand, as you can see, only 6 kilowatts, but they're still discharging at max speed. Now, the way we can fix that is to make sure that no energy is actually being lost, is that we can currently charge at the same rate that we're discharging. As you can see, it's charging at a slightly lower rate than it's discharging, so 44.9, and that's because we have these few idle facilities over here consuming a little bit of energy. So all the surplus is actually going into the accumulators to fill them back up. They go straight back in and they can be reused, so that means that any surplus energy is not going to waste, but it's going straight back into the system. Now, this does take up a little bit more room, but it does make sure that you will never have a situation where you are wasting energy and thereby basically having to overproduce accumulators in order to make them useful. Okay, that wraps up our 4th and 5th build, if I'm counting correctly, in this episode. All of them are really small, but combined they are a very practical thing to have on hand when you're expanding to other planets. Just to summarize, we had the oil facility upgraded, so you can use the interstellar version of that. We had the fractionator that you can use to basically produce as much hydrogen as you want, assuming that you have enough oil to do so, but by this point in the game you have access to the entire universe, so you should have enough oil to do that. You can burn off the graphite using thermal plants, which you can either use to set up more mining planets, or you can use on a planet like I have over here, where you're still burning, and then you can use it to charge up your accumulators. Now, it is a very useful bag of tricks to have up your sleeve in order to expand to other planets. So I hope you find this useful. At the very least, just appreciate how beautiful these builds look. They're not the most useful buildings in the game, but they look so awesome, especially when you switch them in terms of their modes. Just look at that, it's such a nice animation, it looks so cool. Anyway, that is... okay, Apparently I got an achievement for that. Okay, grats me. Yeah, so really nice, really cool. I hope you enjoyed this one, and of course in the next episode we will finally be building those orbital collectors, so don't forget to tune in for that. Subscribe if you haven't, like the video please if you want, and of course only if you actually enjoyed this video, and I will catch you in the next one.